Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Coaching the Bible. This is Beyond Sinai, episode 2. We started last week a new section in our conversations around the second half of the book of Exodus, because for a lot of people in a lot of places, understandably, once it shifts from narrative to detailed building of the tabernacle / Mishkan, and then the vestments, the clothing, the garments of the priests, that part of the book is quote unquote less exciting. And so people are less interested. And so we had to come up with a way to think about it differently and to present it in a way that actually really resonates with a lot of people. And I think the leadership structure, the idea that we have to move beyond Sinai, that after Moses comes down with the tablets, and now the people are moving into that next phase of the relationship of the covenant of being the people of Israel, we can learn a ton about how we build missions and how we build movements from the second half of the book of Exodus. And so last week in session 1, we saw how Moses moved from direct leadership to structured execution. We talked about delegating responsibility and ensuring a very clear blueprint for the Mishkan. Again, the Mishkan is the word for tabernacle in Hebrew. It's just a much cleaner, simpler, easier word to use. We talked about how Moses can't build it alone. We talked about how bringing in Bitzalel and Aholiab, these two individuals who are unknowns at this point, to come in and lead the project. They can't construct it themselves. It requires participation of the entire nation, not through force, but through contribution. So we talked last week about a lot of things relating to the blueprint to the breakthrough. And here now, we're going to talk this week in session 2, episode 232, season 5, episode 19, Fueling the Mission, how great leaders inspire buy-in and build ownership, how they build ownership. And so it's really important to appreciate what we're talking about here. So here in this session, we want to understand, how do we turn passive followers into active stakeholders? It's a huge question of moving people from followership into active mode in participation level. How do you ensure commitment is voluntary and not coerced? It's a really important question as well. And how do you lead in a way that people see the mission as their mission, not as your mission, but as their mission? And for modern leaders, this is really the difference, if you think about it for yourselves, between what you might call compliance, people simply just following along, versus commitment, people really being part of the process. Participation versus ownership. Those are not the same thing. Participation doesn't connote fully engaged. Ownership does. And so here we have to want to think about how we go from the idea that I have to be part of something to I want to be part of something. So this is Beyond Sinai episode 2, Fueling the Mission. I do want to make one other comment first. Last week, I turned on the camera in the recording process and did post that for people to watch this monologue, whatever you want to call it. Viewership was up. I don't know if it was the topic or if it was the camera being on or people curious to seeing the face behind the voice, although I think you could find out without it. We'll see this week if we try it again, if that actually does anything at all. But let's dive right in. Really important to appreciate what we're going to talk about here in Fueling the Mission. And we're going to talk really about 3 real key leadership decisions in inspiring buy-in and ownership. Number 1 is creating a culture of willing participation. So we're going to talk about psychology of buy-in. Number 2, excuse me, we're going to talk about structuring the buy-in for maximum commitment. So we're going to move from people from buying in to really participating. And then we're going to talk about something that I think is counterintuitive for how people think about this, which is the idea of once you have the buy-in and you have the participation, knowing when to stop asking. This is sort of a very odd thing, which admittedly is the subject of, I think, many, many conversations in many podcast episodes potentially, is what happens when you're blessed with overwhelming generosity, and now you have to stop asking people to be generous. And so let's dive in. Here we go. Section 1 of this process here in the idea of fueling the mission is creating a culture of willing participation, the psychology of buy-in. So at the beginning of chapter 25, this is actually the beginning of last week's portion, I actually believe, which talks simply about the idea of God speaking to Moses about the idea of asking people for an offering. So the way the verse reads, take for me an offering. Every person whose heart moves him shall you take for me an offering. It's always hard to read in sort of the Old English in that way. The way it's understood and the way it's written, the way that happens, the way that ask is made, it's not a commandment. It's not obligatory. It's donations from those whose hearts are willing. This Mishkan, this building, will only be built if the people choose to invest in it. And the true commitment here and true commitment in general cannot be coerced. It has to come from within. So we have to ask ourselves as leaders is how do we inspire people to really give voluntarily without pressure? How do you create the emotional investment in the mission without it feeling like it's coerced or forced or unwilling? And we have to appreciate then the deeper psychological part of when do people participate willingly? I learned this a lot in fundraising. I learned it a lot, very much, in the ideas that while building the curriculum and the program for peer-to-peer campaigns, where we're getting individuals who are not fundraisers to raise money on behalf of the organizations that they support, which many people know and have donated to over time, that one of my colleagues there built basically the 4 pillars of the whole model of why it worked. Like, was deep psychology and understanding why that worked. And what's really important to appreciate there, and I think very much what we're going to discuss here, relies on that. Number one is people support what they help create. So if I'm a participant in something, if I'm able to participate in it, I'm going to support it more. We'll talk about the IKEA effect in just a moment. Right? So buy-in happens at a much greater level when people feel personally invested, like they're part of it. They're part owners, quote unquote. The language shifts from you get, like you can be to this is mine. I own it. It's an identifier in that space. And so people will do that. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs has an article in, I think, Covenant and Conversation on the idea that God giving the people the opportunity to build this temple, right? The first version of the temple, and having them build it together was an incredibly powerful unifier, but also just got them participating in the mission and in the covenant in a way that they hadn't yet done before by contributing either materials, skills, just their emotional connection. So that's number one. People support what they help create. Number two, mission over obligation. Moses presents this as the vision, but without their participation, it doesn't work. So he leaves participation up to them. They have to opt in to participate. No one's forced. The commitment here, and commitment in general, commitment very often is emotional and not just logical. So people don't contribute because of necessarily rational arguments, although that helps. They often contribute simply because they care, because it's important. And so when you get in there, you begin to appreciate what's going on as a psychological shift. The famous idea comes from what's called the IKEA effect, that people overvalue what they build, even if it's not objectively superior. So if you've ever bought anything at IKEA, the room I'm sitting in has a couple of IKEA pieces in it, and I put that one together. I put that bookshelf together. And so you value it more than the item that you bought whole in many cases. The study demonstrated, called the IKEA effect in 2012, that individuals place a higher emotional value on things that they actively contribute to, which is why this self-assembled furniture feels more valuable than something pre-made. And so if we're able to help people create the mission and we give them the space in the room to participate, they will fight harder for its success than if they're simply told to do it. And so the leader has to be able to create the space to invite the participation of others, even at the earliest stages, so that their buy-in is much greater. And that is what leads into what's known as by Daniel Pink as the motivational theory, which is the idea that people are motivated by three things: autonomy, they have control over their choices; mastery, they have the opportunity and the ability to grow; and purpose, connecting to something bigger. And so when you craft opportunities for an autonomous contribution, right, they have the opportunity to choose to participate rather than it being top down. This increases the genuine engagement of people. And so then the last part of it is very much social proof, right? This is based in the ideas of persuasion of Robert Cialdini, who we talked about some time ago in Coaching the Bible. People give and they commit when they see others doing so. So now that social proof effect, people noticing, oh, the guy from the tent won over, or the people from the other tribe, I see the tribe of of God is participating in a heavy way. The people of Reuben are really diving in. I'm a member of the tribe of Judah. I can't be any less. I'm going to do it. That's why, as you see, people ask me this all the time, why do you have to list the names of the donors on these pages? Because people look, one, but it's also social proof. It helps people decide to dive in because they see the other names that are there. So what you have in this first stage of this process is really appreciating that what's happening here is this notion that we have to create the culture of willing participation, appreciating and understanding how and when it is that people buy in, and giving them then the space to be able to buy in is really important. And so when you're a nonprofit leader, you're trying to create an emotional engagement with donors so that they'll give to the causes that they feel connected to. They feel like they're part of the mission. So good storytelling, personalization, it's the same thing with a lot of other things. When people are looking to buy, so they want to feel connected. When you're a CEO trying to build the company, you're trying to build a company culture in a way where the employees feel like they're owners and not just compliant playing a role. So they have to give people real autonomy, real choice, real opportunity to make decisions for themselves. And we have to ask ourselves, as the leaders, are people in my organization committed because they believe or because they have to? To expand that a little bit, would they show up to this mission, this place, if they weren't getting paid? Now, that's an extreme version of this, because I think that's probably mostly the case that it wouldn't be, but you get the sense of what's the dividing line? How is it, or why is it that people are participating with me here? It's a really important piece of the puzzle. Have I created a culture where people feel like they're stakeholders, they're owners, and not just participants? And am I inspiring people emotionally, or am I simply just presenting logic? At some point, logic runs out. The emotion has to sometimes carry, and it's very important for buy-in's purpose that the emotion doesn't end. So that's section one, is creating a culture for buy-in. Number two, after you've created that culture, so you can't leave people hanging in the lurch. It has to be more than that. You may have generated the buy-in, but the commitment without action is meaningless. People can say, yeah, rah, rah, I'm in, I'm participating. And then if they don't know what to do, if they're not doing something, they're not active, it's actually not worth very much. So you get rumblings, you get people not interested, you people fall out right away very quickly because we didn't give them tasks or work to do right away. So how do we move from that commitment to participation? How do we get people involved right away? One of the things that I do with a lot of my coaching clients is a very active mode right from the get-go. So they're doing things, accomplishing tasks very early, very quickly, one for the sake of quick wins, but two for the sake of they feel like they're doing something, that it's not just, oh, that makes a lot of good sense, but it's like, okay, I'm in and I'm doing something and I'm active and I'm really part of this process really early. It was something I used to do when I taught high school students. Is the first day of school, we didn't do rules. The first day of school, I taught. And the idea was that at some point you have to start teaching. But if you don't start teaching on the first day, then the student doesn't feel like they did anything. It's not that I gave homework. I didn't give homework. I almost never gave homework. That's a totally different subject. But it had more to do with the idea that I wanted them to feel like we had done something that first day. That if they went home and a parent asked them, they would say, oh, that guy in our Bible class, in our Talmud class, actually taught on the first day. And so that was a really important. It moved from the idea of maybe a commitment to an actual real effect, real action statement. So how do you turn that enthusiasm into action, into execution? And how do you distribute the responsibility in a way that ensures success? So it's not just that everyone has to just sort of move. It's like, an exercise class, but it has to be productive. It has to actually see results. And so now what ends up happening is that you're moving from supporting a mission, cheerleading a mission, to owning the mission and participating in the mission. So how do you do that? What's going on here? So this is where you decentralize the leadership. That's what we talked about a lot last week. Moses moving it from himself to this project manager group, right? The co-owners of the project, Bezalel and Aholiab, and then even further, a distributed leadership model that gets many, many, many people involved. Because once you do that, you're ensuring real tangible participation. It's not just an endorsement and a cheerleader and a rah-rah and a stamp of approval. This is getting others involved and organized into teams to actually construct this, all the different pieces, and building it and getting it together. So we have to think about in our own work, how are we transitioning people from believing in it to actually doing it? What are you doing to make sure that they're ensuring their participation and that it's done in a structured and successful and not chaotic manner? And so how do you structure buy-in for greatest success? It's really important. So number one is real role clarity. People perform best when they understand their specific role and how it connects to the larger mission. So there's something that's called actually the role clarity theory, which makes a lot of sense, right? And so in there, what you're trying to do is you're trying to draw direct connections between someone's task, what the execution is, meaning how do they know that they were successful, but then tying that success into the larger mission. So people want to see not just, okay, what do I have to do, but what is it that I have to do? And how is it that what I have to do connects into what we're trying to do overall? Because then they perform best because they feel like they're part of the ownership of the result. And so clarity of that, really, really important. And so you're breaking it down into really munchable, crunchable, executable, and accomplishable tasks at the end. So that's really important. And so that's the really important piece of this. And so when you give people a role that works for them, they understand what they have to do. You don't define it all the way to the T and tell them exactly how they have to do it. You just have to get the result done. Sometimes it can be too much where you're getting all the way into the details. You have to exactly this way. I don't care exactly how you do it, as long as you get to the result that I get. It gives people some space to be creative. And as long as the results are that the Ark of the Covenant looks the way it's supposed to look, the menorah looks the way it's supposed to look, the beams ultimately are the size and shape and color and of the material that they need to be, we're giving the skilled person space and a little bit of freedom in the tactics and the actual formation of what they're doing. So what you've done is, as a great leader, you're not just getting people excited, you're not getting people just simply to support you and to cheerlead you, but you get people to take real structured action. And so if you think about it between what might be good leadership and bad leadership, so the bad leadership version might be this. If you're trying to raise money, we need to raise $100,000 this quarter. Everyone, go do your part. Amazing, right? People don't know what to do. The better version of that is you look at a person, you say, Joe, you're leading major donor outreach. Jacob, you're handling grassroots campaigns. Judy, you're creating fundraising materials. Our goal is $100,000, and each of you has a defined role in achieving that. That's very specific. Everyone knows exactly what they're doing. They're knowing what the relationship between their task is and the overall goal. And obviously, you're putting people into the spaces where they're going to be most successful. And so this is really, really powerful as a methodology of moving people from commitment, the buy-in, to the action, moving them into the spaces. Now think about it for yourselves. Are you doing that? If you are doing that, great. Are you tying it back to the bigger picture? Amazing. How much freedom and space in the task are you giving the skilled worker to do the thing that they know how to do? And how forced is it? Are you creating the system? Or are you getting all the way granular into the details, which you probably don't have to? Really, really important. But now that participation has been structured and responsibility has distributed, the challenge now shifts again, because now you've given a myriad of tasks to a lot of people to create the greatest success possible. People are excited, people are involved, people are engaged, people are active. And now you come up with an interesting problem. When the gathering phase is complete, so you've got all the people to participate, you got all the materials you want, and now you have to shift from the resource collection to getting all your volunteers to execution. How do you know when enough is enough? How do you know when you've gotten to that point? So you got the commitment to the buy-in. You have people rah-rah excited. You've doled out tasks for people to execute on. And now you come up with a problem. The problem, I think most organizations would look at this as a good problem, the problem of overwhelming generosity. And what's really important here is fundamentally is this. The discipline to know that the generosity and the work that people are doing is serving the mission and not the other way around, where it's serving the people and not the actual mission. So Moses in this story in chapter 36 actually has to stop the people from giving. They've given too much, there's too much material, there's too much available, it doesn't work. At some point, you have to say, okay, enough is enough, legitimately, accurately, literally, and get people to now move from the donation phase, the generosity phase, to the execution phase. I found it a lot of the time with fundraising, you can get people to participate as donors, but to get them to actively participate on the team and to move from support, financial support, to actually being an ambassador, to being quote unquote an evangelist for the organization, to being almost in the case of a peer-to-peer, a fundraiser for the organization, like that's a shift. Sometimes you have to say to somebody, you've been enormously generous. I need you to stop being generous. I need you to join me. And that's like a totally shifting thing that people aren't always ready to do. And so people in this case in the Bible respond with overwhelming generosity. Moses has to tell them to stop. And so now when you have an excess of resources, like what do you do? And so here comes in this idea of stewardship. You have to shift from the case of generosity, of asking, of accumulating materials to execution, but also stewarding the people from stage to stage. And so you have to think about avoiding what effectively are the dangers of excess. You don't want to waste resources. You don't want to lose focus. You don't want to overextend beyond the scope and reach of the mission. You don't want to be gluttonous either. You want to be professional, but you want to be respectful. You want to be gracious, and you want to be trustworthy in the eyes of the people who are giving. And so you have to think about effective resource management versus overaccumulation. You have to think about momentum-driven decision-making versus unchecked growth. If it becomes too much, what happens at that point? What are you doing at that point? It could move into a space where now it's not mission aligned, but it's mission creep, where you're just simply accumulating materials because you can, instead of doing something which for most leaders is counterintuitive, which is to say, stop, we have enough. And so people give beyond expectation here. They're very excited about the cause. People are now feeling good about the idea of building this Mishkan, building this tabernacle. Moses has opened the spigot by giving people the opportunity to contribute materials and to contribute their time and their skills. And now he has to pause the fundraising effort and shift the focus to execution. Stop giving, start doing. This is like a rare moment. And how do you do that? How do you do that as the leader? I have to appreciate that it's really important that you actually do that, because most leaders are often hesitant to stop asking because it feels unnatural. And if you have momentum, why not ride that momentum? The idea of the scarcity mindset, we might need this later, and we might not have the opportunity later, often drives leaders and organizations to keep fundraising beyond necessity. This is, I mean, there's a whole Bible for this Bible. However, great leaders have to recognize that excess resources without purpose it leads to waste and inefficiency and donor fatigue. And so you have to be appreciative that what you're doing here in resource collection is mission driven. It's not endless. Stewardship of the person at that point is as important as their generosity. And so now moving the people and the leader's responsibility, it doesn't just end with the resources gathered. It now extends to using the resources wisely, using people's time and skills wisely, and then executing on the mission. People will trust you more if you say, you know what, we had a goal, we hit the goal, we went a little bit over the goal, we appreciate it, but now we're going to stop, and now we're going to execute on what it is that you gave us these funds for, or you gave us this time for, and now we're going to go a little bit further. Because you get into a space that borders on perhaps breaking the trust space that you live in. And so think about it the following way. If we just, and I'll call the bad leadership version of this, is we're just going to keep fundraising just in case. We could always use more money, and I get where that comes from. That does lead to waste. It does lead to mission creep, and it does lead to donor fatigue, because you don't give people a chance to breathe. You also don't give them a chance to appreciate the impact of what it is. The good leader says, you know what, we've reached our goal. We have a task ahead. We have a project to finish. Now we're going to execute effectively and efficiently. We're going to tell everybody exactly what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and we're going to update them as we go through that process. And so that's really important. You have to ask yourself as the leader, can I do this? Can I stop it? Can I say, we've reached our goal, enough is enough? I'm shifting now from fundraising mode to execution mode. You're always going to have people who are in fundraising mode. I get it, of course. That's what fundraisers do. But if you have a team of people who are not just fundraisers, you need people to execute. And you have to make sure that you're guarding against mission creep, excess waste, and the busting of the trust that you've built over the course of time. And so this is what we have in this portion of this process of moving beyond Sinai. Because what you have so far is last week, which is the blueprint to the breakthrough, appreciating what we're about to do. This week is about commitment and buy-in and the beginnings of execution. And what we're having here is the great leadership. Great leaders don't just set that vision in motion. This is understanding, this is now going next step with that. They're inspiring people to make it their own. In this episode, we've explored how we're looking at how Moses mobilized the people to invest deeply and personally in the building of this tabernacle, creating the buy-in, structuring their participation, knowing when to stop asking, and moving in to execution. It's really important that we appreciate how that is. But that leads us into next week, which is where you have to, what we'll call wearing the weight, the role of identity, symbols, and responsibility in leadership. When we talk about the priestly garments, which I know appear in this week's portion, but is only in terms of our progression for next week, because true leadership isn't just about what you do, it is very much about how you show up and what you represent. And so it's really important to appreciate the progress that we're making and appreciating how you build this culture and how you execute from vision to action. To finish with a quote, as we always do, this is a great quote. I cannot pronounce the name of the person who made this quote. It's Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I don't know how to pronounce that. I apologize in advance, but it's a great quote. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood. Teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea, because it's very much about the vision, and it isn't just simply about the wood, the materials. Think about the mission. Think about the why. Believe in the deep buy-in, the commitment to the greater thing, and then you might get much greater success ultimately. That is Coaching the Bible for this week in episode 2 of Beyond Sinai series. I know it was long. I thank you for your time. I wish you the greatest of weekends, health, happiness, and all the blessing in the world.